Welcome to the Corporate Innovation Crash Course. My name is Steve Glaveski and I am a co-founder at Collective Campus. Today, I want to have a conversation. It's not going to be just about me standing at the front of the room talking all sorts of stuff throughout the day, because the human brain can only focus on one person speaking at them for so long. This is why TED Talks tend to be about 15 minutes long, right? So I want to have a conversation today. I want this session to be all about your organization and how what I'm talking about today can apply at your company. So what should we not expect today? Well, here's a comic that my colleague Shay put together, and this is definitely what this session is not all about. And I'm sure many of you might be able to relate to this topic of an innovation lab being set up amidst a fury of all sorts of marketing campaigns and branding messages being sent out, and ultimately 6 months later there's very little to show for it and we quietly move on. That's not what it's about. We're not about innovation theater here, we're about innovation outcomes. Today I want you to channel Homer Simpson and just say, I don't know. If you don't know, don't feel like you need to censor yourself. One of the biggest pitfalls of human thinking is censoring ourselves, refusing to ask the question because we fear how it will make us look, that it will make us look foolish or whatnot. But there's nothing more foolish than not asking the question, because then we don't learn. And chances are, if you're thinking it, someone else in the room is thinking it too. So please say, I don't know, or what did you mean? And ask as many questions as you like throughout today. That's how you will learn. That is the best way to learn, in my opinion. Asking, learning from someone else, and then of course applying it and teaching others. So why does the Corporate Innovation Crash Course even exist? Well, firstly, it's because this old thing, the iPod Classic, once revolutionary, it's now gathering dust at the bottom of our drawers somewhere. We've moved on to listening to music on our smartphones, right? And so many of us are getting home from the office and we're probably saying, hey Google, hey Alexa, play that song from The Breakfast Club. And jumped ahead there with my slides. And we're probably saying, yeah, hey Google, play that song from The Breakfast Club. And what's it going to play? Of course it's going to play Don't You Forget About Me from The Simple Minds. Or in my case, I'm probably going to say, hey, play that song from Rocky. And it's going to play Eye of the Tiger. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't know my favorite song from Rocky, which is No Easy Way Out from Rocky IV. Clearly the best song in the Rocky franchise. So this shortening of time between disruptive innovations is basically being manifest in the average company lifespan. In the middle of the 20th century, the average company lifespan of organizations on the S&P 500 was about 60 years long. Nowadays, that number is about 15 years long. And by 2030, it's anticipated that it will be just 10 years long. Furthermore, this is being manifest, or this shows up in the fact that 50% of today's S&P 500 companies will be replaced in the next 10 years on that index at current rates of churn. So the whole notion of an old guard being forever omnipresent is just completely busted. So what's driving this shortening of disruptive innovations, or the shortening of time between disruptive innovations? Well, at its core, it's about technology change. It's about Moore's Law, which is essentially the doubling of computing power every 18 to 24 months. But when I say that, as human beings, we evolved to understand visuals rather than just words. So let's put Moore's Law into perspective. If I took a 1 meter step today and doubled that every day for 30 days, so I'd take 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on. How many steps do you think I've walked by the end of the 30th day? It's not a small number. In fact, it's over 1,049,000,000 meters, which is enough to walk around the world 26 times. Now that all started with a 1 meter step, doubled every day for 30 days. Now that's essentially the nature of Moore's Law, and that's why it is so potent insofar as fundamentally changing not only the technological landscape and business landscape, but also our lives. I rarely get on a train when less than, say, 90% of the people have their faces buried in their phones instead of talking to the person next to them. So Whether or not that's a good thing or not, that's a different story and outside the scope of this particular workshop. But this also shows up in the fact that we are sitting on the cusp of the upheaval of almost every industry we know. Moore's law is not a new phenomena. It's been increasing at this rate. Technology power or computing power, the number of transistors on a microchip, has been doubling at this rate since the 1960s. And now we're sitting on the cusp of this. Like I said, the upheaval of almost everything we know, which is why the world is becoming more uncertain, which is why we need to learn how to better navigate in this world. And therefore, this is why we're talking about corporate innovation today, which amongst many people has become a bit of a buzzword, as too has agile, as too has lean, a lot of these words. But the thing about buzzwords is they become overused because they're relevant. And because they become overused, they start to be called buzzwords and they start to become commoditized, and people just throw them around liberally, not really paying homage to what they're really all about. And that's why we end up with innovation labs that don't do much other than serve to maybe get us a little bit of press when we first announce them, and then 6 months later we're shutting the doors. So insofar as technology is concerned, there's a lot of things coalescing right now that are changing the game. It's not about technologies in isolation, it's about that coalescence. So whether it was the web to cloud infrastructure, blockchain, data analytics, artificial intelligence, genomic sequencing, autonomous vehicles, all this stuff, it's not really that they're powerful on their own. It's when you combine, for example, data with AI and wearable technology that things become really interesting. So we're sitting on the cusp of a lot of change. And in order to better navigate that change, we need to understand how our organizations are essentially handcuffed today. Because while we'd love to be able to innovate, the reality is every time we do that, we come up against all sorts of barriers internally. Because let's face it, a startup and a large organization are very different beasts. A large organization is not a larger version of a startup, because a startup is essentially operating initially with no business model, very little revenue, no customers, and because of all of this uncertainty, they're playing offense. But as a large established organization, we have customers. We have a business model that makes money. We have certainty around how we make money. We're probably a listed company and we have shareholders we're accountable to. And because of all of that, we are essentially playing defense. We don't want to shake the tree because, hey, we're getting paid a good salary. We're getting a good Christmas bonus. Our company is doing well. The share price is increasing. Let's not shake the tree too much. And this shows up in a number of different ways in our organizations. And the term the innovator's dilemma, if you're not familiar with it, it was coined by Clayton Christensen, who released a book of the same name. And in that book, he came up with the theory of disruptive innovation, which we'll unpack as today goes on. So when people talk innovation, I've seen a lot of corporate executives stand behind a lectern at a town hall meeting and say things like, we need to be bold, we need to be innovative, without really defining what that means to that organization. So when it comes to innovation, there's 3 key types I want you to get your head around. 1, sustaining or incremental innovation, basically improving what we already do today. 2, adjacent innovation, taking something we do, but then applying a new business model or novel technology to it to fundamentally change the game. A great example of that is Uber Eats, taking the mobility software of Uber, but applying it to food delivery, but also leveraging that captive audience that Uber had already developed with the Uber app. And then 3, disruptive innovation, which is that breakthrough innovation that essentially helps us to create new markets or to come up with something that is by an order of magnitude better than what already exists, or by an order of magnitude cheaper than what already exists. So much so that it captures a big slice of the existing market, kind of like what smartphones did to feature phones. So when we talk innovation, sustaining or incremental, adjacent, and disruptive innovation can be captured on the 3 horizons framework, which is something that the consulting firm McKinsey put together many years ago. Horizon 1 being incremental, where about 70% of your R&D investment should be allocated. Horizon 2, adjacent, about 10 to 15%. And then Horizon 3, disruptive, somewhere in the order of 5 to 10%. That is essentially the makeup, because so many organizations talk about, let's turn everyone in our organization into a startup entrepreneur. Let's move fast and break things and adopt the Facebook mantra. But that's not what it's about. If we move fast and break things in a large company, we're probably going to find ourselves delisted and out of business very, very soon. We need the core business, which is making money, which is playing defense, to keep doing that. But at the same time, we need to start investing in the future, because we might find ourselves without a core business model in 5 or 10 years' time because of all the uncertainty that's in the market and because of all the change that's going on, all of the technology disruption, and the fact that the barriers to entry for new entrants into once impenetrable industries are lower than ever, which is why we're seeing billions, if not almost trillions of dollars being pumped into startups across the world on a global basis, on an annual basis rather. So the nature of disruptive innovation, we've talked incremental, adjacent, but today I really want to focus on disruptive innovation, which is the thing that large organizations struggle with the most, because we're playing defense. And disruptive innovation actually requires us to play offense. So 4 key characteristics of disruptive innovation. Initially, it's simpler, cheaper, and lower performing, which is probably not good enough for our core customers. I mean, simpler and cheaper, lower performing. Have a think about the first digital camera that Kodak released back in something like 1983. In fact, I don't even think they released it. But it was the size of a toaster, and it was something like 0.1 megapixels. Not good enough for their photographer audience to use. 2, initially it's lower margins, not higher profits. So if I'm a big organization that's making $1 billion a year and I want to grow by 5% next year, well, we need to find an extra $50 million. And the thing about disruptive innovation initially is that the money in the first 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, is probably not going to be there, because that time is spent learning, iterating, adapting, and trying to figure out what that magic formula is. I mean, companies today who are worth billions of dollars, they made very little in their first year or two. Sometimes it took them several years to get to that point where they become a quote-unquote overnight success story. Number 3, existing customers can't use them initially, which kind of ties into the first point as well. And number 4, commercialized in insignificant markets. So any new innovation tracks the technology adoption curve, or the innovation adoption curve. Initially, you probably only have about 2.5% of the eventual market, which is made up of people who we can call innovators, who just try new things just because. They're the ones that will start to use your technology initially, or your product initially. Following that, we have early adopters. Now, early adopters will make somewhere around 12.5 to 15% of the eventual market. So if I think about, say, an example, say the tablet. When that first came along, a lot of people thought, well, that's just a big phone, except I can't call people or text people. That's just silly. Why would I want one of those? But your technologists, they all lined up on day one at the Apple stores to buy one just because. And then within a few months, other people, the early adopters, they could see the value of the tablet. I can read books on it, I can watch movies, I can take notes, it makes browsing a little bit better, I can even play video games on it. Sure, I'll buy one. And then the rest of the market eventually follows. The early majority, and then the late majority, and your laggards. Now, your laggards are the kinds of people who held onto the analog phones long after the analog signal, well, until the analog signal was actually switched off. So that's the nature of disruptive innovation, and it's very clear to see by looking at that as to why large organizations struggle with this stuff, because our existing customers can't use them. They're not going to make enough money for us to hit our targets right now. And initially, the market's really, really small. So it just does not excite us, because every metric we use to determine how we go about investing resources in a large company are basically diametrically opposed to what those metrics need to look like to actually explore this stuff successfully.